There's an awful lot of people in the psychological field that went to school to solve their own pain.
Right.
I grew up with a very simple model of the brain. There were two kinds of brain: smart, stupid. The world was simple and good back then. And for the first 4 years of my life, I was just an ordinary kid growing up, but I was fiercely competitive, as second boards often are. When my sister 2 years older than I went to kindergarten, I was deprived and robbed and cheated of obviously desirable experience. And to get me out of her hair, my mother began to homeschool me in first grade at 4 years old. So 2 years younger than anybody else in school. We know now that the executive portion of your brain, the prefrontal cortex up here, is nowhere near developed enough to handle those kinds of things at 4 years old. So all the way through school, I was behind the other kids, struggling academically, and therefore very quickly labeled as stupid.
Right.
Now, this is a cultural label because of a organic problem. I was too young. I was too big for my britches. I didn't need to go to school. Mother should have held me back, but I insisted on competing because there's an awful lot of people in the psychological field that went to school to solve their own. We have a glitch there.
Yeah. Yes, I believe you.
Because of the organic problem of my brain not being developed enough, I got bad grades. I was labeled as stupid. Then you have this wonderful thing called shame. And shame doesn't attack the organic mind. It doesn't show up on a brain scan as these neurons or these cells are damaged. It is in your mind. It's in your soul. It's in this intangible, non-material part of you that interfaces with your brain. So I began to wrestle with being the stupid kid in the family when my older sister and my next younger brother turned out to be the smart kids. And that creates a whole package of emotional expectations on the part of the family, emotional expectations on my part, performance. And it's the result of the mind this time being the punching bag for what was going on in the brain that was able to do the schoolwork. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay. So that was my foundation. And there was nothing really done or discussed back then because stupid kids are just stupid. So you put up with them, you push a little harder, you don't expect much of them. And that was my framework through the elementary years. My older sister was a good girl and I was the dumb one. But then we have another factor that kicked in, which is molestation. From about 6 to 9 years old, I was molested repeatedly. And as usually happens, it was by a close family friend. As usually happens, the child goes immediately into shame because he knows something was wrong. And in that immature brain that can't problem solve, the conclusion is, I'm a bad boy because something very naughty happened to me. So now I've got shame on top of my shame and not getting any help. And in that process of the repeated abuse came the DID, dissociative identity disorder. Nobody knew about it back then. In the 70s, when it was discussed, it was MPD, multiple personality disorder. But I was broken in a way that nobody could recognize and nobody had language for. And it was in my soul, my mind, not in my brain, because your mind has to do something with the trauma and it encapsulates it. It breaks part of your identity to form a container over here to hold the pain, hold the shame, so that the main portion of your life could function. Well, function is a loose term because you become, even though it's a coping mechanism, you become more dysfunctional.
Right.
So here I am going into my 10 to 15-year-old period. Nobody knows about DID. I have no comprehension of what's happened to my mind. I just know, and my parents know, that my behavior became far more erratic. First of all, emotionally, I can remember so many times at the dining room table that Dad would ask me a simple question like, did you fill the gas tank in the lawnmower before you put it away? And I would just burst into tears in front of the family. And I remember Dad looking at my mom with this look on his face. What did I do? Nobody understood triggering. Nobody understood I was DID. Nobody understood that question was bumping a part in me that would come to the front, couldn't handle it. It was a crazy making time. So now we have a third layer of shame because I'm so random. And one of the big issues in DID is how quickly you can get back to your core. They call it the high competent part. Well, my high competent part wasn't overly impressive, but it was better than the parts that were shattered. And some people can be triggered and switch and get back to their grounding within an hour or two. There was no way with me. If I went down early in the day, I was an emotional mess and a problem for the rest of the day. Most of the time, I could reset overnight and wake up with a high competence part in front, but even that wasn't guaranteed. And I remember, Arthur woke up on the wrong side of the bed again because.
Sorry. Was this like an episode that would just? Would you be able to recognize you were having an episode with the DID, or was it something that was just?
No, I recognized, and everybody recognized that I was off, that I was emotionally turbulent, that I was hyperreactive, that I was not really reasonable in terms of discussing the data of the situation, just hyperreactive. Everybody knew. I spread the pain around when I switched, not to worry. The whole thing knew when I had switched into one of these other parts, but we had no idea what it was. I was simply a bad boy.
When you did switch, did you notice any physiological symptoms like dizziness or like fatigue when you went in between altars, or was it just all of a sudden your personality changed? And also, did you have a full blown dissociative possession form, or like dissociative amnesia wing of DID?
Okay. Realize this is half a century ago. I don't remember anything other than the emotional turbulence and the inability to function logically. So those are the two big things. The others may have been there, but I don't know. Now, in terms of demonic, I'm not aware of any at that time associated with the DID. It was just the switching different parts of the DID. And let me come back to a little bit of language. We have two modalities in DID. One is co-conscious and the other is not. Co-conscious means that when a part comes to the front, the main person and the rest of the parts are tracking what's going on. And when we switch back, everybody remembers what happened yesterday. That's co-conscious. There's individuals that switch and the amnesic barrier comes up and they have no idea what they did. So I get emails from some of my friends who are DID, and it's a part that came out at 2:00 in the morning, wrote me an email. When the person wakes up in the morning, they have no idea that somebody's been emailing me, and they've learned to check their phone every morning first thing to see who's been having a party. That's not co-conscious. It's very unsettling, disturbing, embarrassing because some of the parts shoot off their mouths about some pretty personal things while the person is switched and asleep at night. But I all through my DID experience.
Right. Now, so how long did you live with DID before you were able to find kind of some help, some counseling to sort of put you back together to reintegrate your alters?
Well, do the math. It began before I was 10, and it was 40 before I had any explanation for what was going on.
Okay, so about 30
that
years.
Was a very surreal experience. I had taken a friend who was messed up to Dr. Tom Hawkins, who was one of the premier pioneers in terms of SRA-DID when he was alive. And he was explaining to them what DID is like. You know, I'm just a friend along for moral support. He's explaining how it works. I'm sitting there thinking, this is way, way too familiar. This can't be me too. What is happening here? It was a yanking day when I got language for what had been my goofy life all along.
Right. So I wasn't sure if I was going to
accidentally.
I wasn't sure if I was going to air this on here or not, but I actually found out a few years ago, a little over 2 years ago, that I had DID, and it was by accident. We were actually reading. My wife got into counseling, and her family's they've used your counseling for 25 years since she started with Plumline. Her mom's been utilizing your material, and so as soon as I got married 8 years ago, was the first time I was introduced to your stuff. But we were going through, and she actually found it in a psychology magazine. We were trying to figure out what was going on with me because we'd be in a huge fight, and for one, they were always over almost nothing. I mean, there was no logic behind why I was upset like that.
Right there.
And then I would stop her in the middle of a fight and say, "Hey, why are you mad at me?" And she says, "What do you mean? Why am I mad at you?" And at that point, I was always really dizzy, really tired. My eyes, I would go something over. So normally that impulsive. And I do care about my life. I don't, there's no reason to be riding a motorcycle that fast, but I'm not capable of doing that. That's not something I can do. They call it a chicken stripe or chicken strip on the side of your tire, depending on how far you lean. It's almost gone. It was over 1.5 inches wide, and now it's wiped out. And that was overnight. All of a sudden I was able to ride a motorcycle like a motorcycle racer. Thought, wow, holy moly. You know? It's interesting.
World, and yet tens of thousands of people manage through it, better or worse. And you are very fortunate to have a wife who was able to walk with you through the insanity of your switching and looking her in the face and saying, I wasn't yelling at you. We've got an album in our store called Doing Deliverance in Your Brain. We did some EEGs, and we have in the final DVD of that set, there's an EEG of somebody who is switching. Now, with our EEG, we have, I think, 19 leads that are connected to your brain. So you've got these 19 wiggly lines going across the screen. And when somebody switches in DID, everything switches off. All of those 19 electrical lines drop down to the bottom of the screen. There's no electrical activity in your brain for about a half a second, and then you see them come back up and spread out again. And in this particular person, they kept switching. In other words, the high competence part was so upset with what I was doing, they fled, and a part got shoved to the front. It tried to get traction. It couldn't stay. It fled. Another part came. It fled. Another part came. And it is surreal to watch all of the electrical current in your brain switch off for a second, and a new player comes into the driver's seat and tries to reboot and get going. And after a few seconds, it quits. So that's all documented. But you're absolutely right in terms of that shutting down, that dizziness, that blank spot between high competence, who was having the fight with your wife, and the next one that came up that didn't know anything at all about the fight. You had switched your brain off. All the electricity was off for a second.
Right.
So I got a question. So you were homeschooled most of your life, it sounds like, or all of it? And
I went to school 6th grade and 12th grade.
And it sounds like you had DID for most of your life, or until you were about 40. You said?
Yeah, by about 2nd grade on, I was invited.
I'm trying to picture what life was like for you. I mean, I don't know if you had loads of friends, if it was hard to make friends, if and then just growing up into the job world, and just I can't imagine, how hard that would be, or if were you switching all the time? Was it like, how difficult was life, or was it you were just used to it, so it was just that was life for you?
Well, here's a rotten little principle. DID people attract DID people. That's why an awful lot of divided people marry a divided person. You put two divided people in one marriage, it gets pretty goofy pretty quickly. So I did not sustain very many relationships, and almost all the relationships that I had were with messy people. So two messy people, as long as they aren't trying to do anything like live life in a marriage, we could come together, play, talk, have our pity parties, and so on, without art very quickly. But my childhood in terms of relationships was compartmentalized. I could never do a group community. One-on-one was the extent of my social skills, and I plowed through kids fairly quickly. Academically, it was a bust. I limped through the elementary school and junior high. It got worse in high school. I cheated my way through 3 classes to finally graduate with a low C average because I was stupid, you see. So, yeah.
Sorry, I was checking our live chat here. So somebody just asked a question for you real quick, Arthur, and then I've got a couple myself. So do you think that DID often, and actually I have a question related to this as well. Now, so SRA, satanic ritual abuse, they try to actually create DID in somebody, correct?
Yeah, there's a difference between the DID from molestation, which is by far the most common. In other words, trauma that is overwhelming to a young child. So if you had surgery in the first year of your life, you may well be DID from that hospital stuff. If you've been molested in the first 10 years of your life, you probably are DID. If you were in a savage car accident at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, you're probably DID. So that kind of trauma is in a class by itself. It's much less damaging, although it obviously messes up your life. Now, with SRA, they are deliberately bringing trauma to a child to divide them in particular ways, and then they will train or threaten the part that is out or program it. So SRA is quantum level of intensity more than the DID from molestation or hospitalization or car accident.
Okay. Somebody asked, this is kind of off topic slightly, but somebody asked if SRA can be passed down to future generations via epigenetics or through generational curses.
Let's break that down into pieces. Epigenetics, first of all, is a very cool buzzword these days, but all they've done is established a couple of things in rats in a lab, and there's not really a functional working paradigm. So let's take that off the table because nobody really knows enough to discuss that intelligently. Now, going down to the passing on generationally, you have a variety of different issues. Let's start with DID. Imagine the difference between an apple and a tangerine. An apple is your mind. It's all one piece. There's no creases, no grooves on it. And if you're first generation DID, you have to be pretty intentional. Get out a sharp knife, lean on it hard in order to cut that in half. Now, if you're second generation DID, it appears as though you're born already segmented. You're a tangerine, you're all together, all the pieces are there, nothing is broken, but it's very easy with your hands to segment out a tangerine. So a child of a divided person is going to divide much more quickly than a child of somebody who's not divided. We good so far?
Yeah.
So that is a mind issue, not brain, but mind. Your mind is predisposed to solve trauma by separating out instead of by processing it. Then the issue of generational curses and covenants and demons, yes, that passes down from generation to generation, whether or not the next generation is divided. So a person can be the child of a survivor and not be DID, but be pretty well slimed with critters or curses.
Right. So it can. I kind of misunderstood. I'm not real clear there. So it can be passed down generationally. Right.
SRA is an activity. Satanic ritual abuse is.
Oh yeah.
Okay. It's kind of being hit in the head with a baseball. That's an event.
Right.
And SRA is a deliberate action by human beings on another human being with malice aforethought, with skill, with knowledge what they're doing. Now, very commonly, one generation of perpetrators, Satanists are going to try for the next generation. But the act of SRA is not generational. The effects of SRA can be without the SRA. Does that make sense? Let me go back to a much simpler illustration. My mom and dad grew up in the Great Depression. My mom was born 2 weeks before the stock market crash. So they experienced severe hardship economically. We good?
Yeah.
That's their life. It happened to them. They lived through that. They lived through the war. That's first generation experience. I did not live through the Great Depression. I was born well after that, after the war, but my emotions are colored by the emotions of my parents, who projected a lot of stuff onto me because that's what they've been through. So I haven't been through the experience they've been through, but I'm colored in my worldview by their experiences. So the child of a survivor is going to be colored. They're going to be tainted emotionally, cognitively, their worldview, plus the issue of the demonic, whether they experience the actions of somebody deliberately trying to break them.
Okay, that makes sense. So the next logical question, I'm sure people, as this episode gets bigger and bigger, people are going to have questions about treatment for this kind of stuff. I'm sure somebody's going to see this in themselves and say, oh, hey, maybe we should look into this. So do you have any other questions?
This might be a good lead-up question. Is DID, do you think more people have it than they realize it? It's maybe harder to recognize because it's like a mild case of it? Or is it just underdiagnosed because it seems like a big, like, you have DID, like it's like a big thing to diagnose someone with a big thing like DID versus like ADD or something, where it's like, you're just a little hyper, here, take these drugs. Where DID is kind of a bigger, it seems like a more like severe diagnosis. So maybe it's underdiagnosed, maybe, or is that?
Okay. Let's clear this up very, very carefully. Dissociation is a continuum. So you have severe cases where a person might have dozens and dozens of parts, alters that are in different kinds of systems. And you can have an individual that has just one part. So let's take a simplistic situation. You're 2 years old, you're a city kid, you go out to Uncle George's farm, and while you're at Uncle George's farm, the turkey takes offense at you and it races up to you. It's bigger than you are. It pecks you 5 times violently while it's, flapping its wings. That might be enough trauma to divide you. We good? You have one little part that stores the memory of turkey attacks. You go back to the city, you're not on a farm for the rest of your life. You would never know that you're divided because you aren't triggered because you never see another turkey.
Gotcha.
So I think there are 100,000 people that have a part, and the family just knows, Sally's goes off periodically. Nobody knows what triggers her. Just a couple, 3 times a year, she gets over it. And we just, cut her a little bit of slack with, that's Sally. So there's a huge number of people that are DID. They don't know they're DID. It only affects them once in a great while, and they never get treatment. and so on. Now, the more common one is medical. And there's an awful lot of people that are triggered by a white lab coat. The medical profession understands that. So that's a larger pool that is going to get triggered. Every time you go to the doctor's office for something minor, you are being triggered by what happened when you were 3 days old and you had surgery and you don't remember any of that, but you've got a part that holds all that trauma. My belief is that there are more people who are on DID rather than fewer, and the stigma is lifting rapidly. 10 years ago, it was unheard of for somebody to admit that they had been DID and are now fully functional. Today, this conversation is pretty generic. There's an awful lot of people that are openly willing to talk about it. You go on the web and look at DID forums or go to Twitter and type in parts dissociation, and there's a huge discussion going on out there. So we're moving from the taboo and the shame to let's discuss it. Now, at the same time, we have a bigger problem in that everybody and his dog and cat is a psychologist these days, with or without a license, and are treating people with DID or whatnot. And in the last 10 years, there has been a huge number of individuals who have been badly traumatized by their counselors. I'm saying, guys, this is not the way the game is supposed to work. You know, we got enough problem with perps out there destroying people. You don't need to go to your therapist office to get destroyed. And that's why I have been on the warpath on this issue. We've started a new series called Strategies for EID, and our first album is out. My basic principle is we have moved too far away from reality. We can't fix this with a 2% course correction. It's not one more little tool and insight. We need massive refit of the whole paradigm. So that's what I'll be about for the next few years. I go a couple, 3 times a year to Spartanburg, South Carolina, where we hold those seminars live. And I'm saying there's a better way. I know there's a better way because I see the people that have come through a healing journey with much less destabilization, much less loss of dignity than the older model. We've got to quit hurting wounded.
They want to give me a prescription for benzodiazepines. There's no doubt in my mind that if I hadn't found your stuff, and we just stumbled on it. I had never heard of DID before. Deborah had never heard of DID before. Mm-hmm. But we were already going through your Blessing Your Spirit book. I mean, we've been going through it for 6 months, just trying to find something, because we thought I was possessed, to be honest. We thought that it was demonic, what was going on with me, because it was so obvious that there was something. And so we started doing your Blessing Your Spirit stuff, and then we stumbled upon this DID diagnosis. And then we started digging into your stuff some more. And all of a sudden you say, well, I recommend that you go through the Blessing Your Spirit book for about 6 months before you start therapy. So we were able it was obviously a God thing. And there's no way that it's a coincidence that God led me to you instead of to a therapist or a psychologist to bring correction about the situation. Mm-hmm. But we were able to reintegrate everybody in about 6 weeks because we had gone through 6 months of your Blessing Your Spirit, Blessing Your Soul books. We went through all of them twice. And that's not, I mean, it was incredible. There's no way I would have got that anywhere else. I also went through one Sozo session at Bethel in Reading, which was helpful, but nothing like, we did 8 hours a day of Sozo here at our house for 2 years. It was crazy. I can't believe we even had enough time to work and pay our bills. It was just constant therapy for 2 years.
Well, let me give you a couple of pieces that color my model. And I'm not, I'm not tearing down anybody else's model because there's about a dozen different modalities out there and they work in different ways for different people. So I'm just saying this is what I've developed, what's worked well for me, because my objectives are twofold. Number one, how can we do this with the least amount of trauma and shame for the individual? And number two, how can we do it quicker? This 10-year sentence for working with DID is ridiculous. And the first piece of our model is that we begin with the human spirit, because I believe the human spirit is able to work with your soul better than my soul is able to work with your soul. In traditional psychology, my soul, my mind is engaging with your soul and your mind, and we're doing whatever modality they're using to try to heal it. And it obviously works. A lot of people have been helped through psychology. A lot of people have been helped through that model. But I believe it's much quicker for your own spirit to minister to your own soul and to bring about healing. So that's one component of my model. The other is the issue of time. We've done a fair amount of work on the living dynamic of our timeline. Let me give you this simple illustration of time as an electrical wire. You have a high tension wire, it's going 100 miles, it's got 250,000 volts on it. But if you cut out 6 inches of that wire and put in plastic, the continuity is broken and the electricity isn't going to flow. We good? Simple information. You do the same thing with your timeline, and you take out all of these pieces of your timeline, a dozen different pieces where there's been trauma, and you've rejected your timeline. You don't have continuity. The normal accumulation of life stuff doesn't happen. It's kind of like finishing second grade. You go to third grade and you don't remember anything that you learned in second grade. And you've got to learn second grade and third grade all at once. Then you go to fourth grade and you can't remember anything you learned in third grade. That's awful. That's terrible. And yet an individual who is divided usually has breaches in their timeline so that there's not a continuity. The treasures that they've accrued in childhood, the treasures that they've accrued at each point in their life doesn't flow forward into the present. So in addition to working with the spirit, we work on time to go back to the point of conception and repair the timeline so that all of our stuff, everything that we have accrued through life, is available to us.
Right.
And those two things have helped speed things up a lot.
Right. And I would like to, you said in the beginning that I asked what your qualifications or whatever were, quote unquote. You've spent dealing with stuff like this, with time, with portals, with DID, with all this stuff. How many years have you been doing this? 25 plus years now, at least, right?
Yeah, right around 25. The company's 24 years old, and I was dabbling before that, stumbling around, blind man in a cave.
So and this is your job 8 hours a day or more? Typically.
No. I run a think tank, and we work on quite a number of projects. The SRA DID is a tiny little part of my life. I'm presently working with just 3 people. One individual who is really stuck, one who's in the middle of their journey, one who's almost done. I keep my fingers in the pie just lightly because it's an ongoing discussion, but I'm primarily a resource for counselors who are doing this full time. So when someone's stuck, they're working with somebody else, they can send me an email and say, I've done this, this, and this. Everything worked up until this point, and we can't get beyond it. So one person wrote and said, we've got this protector that won't let my therapist talk to any of the parts. Can you give me any ideas how to get around it? So I'm a idea source for people that are hands-on, but my personally working with DID is just a tiny, tiny piece of my life.
Well, I mean, so not just your DID stuff, but your business, your Sapphire Leadership Group and Plumline, you've spent tens of thousands of hours studying and researching more than most people that have been through college or something like that. So because you don't have, so what I wanted to get out to the audience there is there's therapists and psychologists from all over the world that come to you for help with these things, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I brainstorm with a lot of people, a lot of backgrounds.
Okay, so I would personally consider you an expert in a lot of these areas. And there's also about 20 other ones I'd love to get you on and pick your brain about.
I'm very knowledgeable, but I'm also very, very clear to the culture. I'm not credentialed in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
No government agency has put a stamp of approval on me. I'm just a freewheeling, free thinking. And I grew up obsessed with the why question. And then when my own life began to disintegrate, I was asking bigger and bigger why questions, saying, why isn't life working for me? There's got to be an answer. So I'm just driven by the why. Our metric or our motto is every single effect has a cause. You see a baseball up in the air, there's a bat, there's an arm, there's a pitching machine. The baseball didn't just get wings and float up there. So we look at results. We look at what's happening. We look at aberrant behavior and say, wow, I have no idea what caused that, but we're not going to ignore it. Something caused that. And we begin by accepting the aberrant behavior and go looking for the root.
Right.
Sometimes we don't.
So let's go back to that. If somebody did, say somebody's dealing with this and they want to they're fresh, they just realize all of a sudden this is what's happening. What would be a good first resource for them to reach out for? Would you say maybe one of your books or CD? Should they just start like the Blessing Your Spirit or Soul stuff? Or
No. Let me give a different starting place. It doesn't require buying anything. Remember my model. We have spirit, soul, and brain. Spirit, mind, and brain, whatever term you want to use. And at this point in working with people, I would begin with the brain, because our brain is affected by what we do. The axiom in the industry is the neurons that fire together wire together. So we learn the times table by repeating 4 times 4 equals 16, 5 times 5 equals 25. The repetition of those neurons creates neurological pathways so that we can retrieve. We good?
Yeah.
Now, with DID, when your software is broken, you're going to develop some strange pathways, the triggering pathways, but you're going to have a huge portion of your brain that isn't activated at all. And we have to do some brain repair before we can significantly work on the software. And where I have people begin is with the difference between pleasure and joy. The way Jim Wilder defines joy is when somebody else is glad to see you. You walk into a room after the party started, one person looks up, it's immaterial whether you're there. Another person looks up, oh, not him. A third person looks up and says, Arthur, you're here. Okay, that's joy. Somebody else being glad that you exist affects the joy cluster, which is behind your right eye. Somebody said that the pleasure cluster is over here in the left prefrontal cortex. Don't know whether that's true. It doesn't matter. But pleasure is different from joy in that pleasure is something that you can experience unilaterally by yourself without people. Most DID people have a very underdeveloped pleasure center, and you need that for various reasons. So I say start with the senses, and you do 3 things. You anticipate, you stay in the moment, and then you savor it afterwards. So I'm outside working in the yard, it's hot, sticky day, humid, and I'm anticipating finishing this task. I can go in the kitchen and pour myself a glass of iced tea. That's pleasure. I don't care whether you like me or not today. It has nothing to do with relationships. I'm experiencing pleasure. So while I'm drinking the tea, instead of planning the next project I'm doing in the yard, I'm staying there in the moment, feeling the cold glass in my hand, on my lips, the iced tea going down. I'm experiencing that pleasure. I go back out to work. I'm remembering the pleasure. And we have to identify the pleasures. What smells bring us pleasure? What sounds? What tactile feelings? What taste? What sights? And to begin to vigorously build the pleasure portion of your brain as a anchor, as a safe place that you can retreat to when the anxiety of counseling gets too high. Most people don't have a safe place, so they switch. And switching in the midst of counseling isn't necessarily the most productive way to get whole. So I start with pleasure at home. It doesn't take money. It doesn't take a book. just spend 2 months consciously trying to do 30 pleasure exercises a day. You're in the shower. Well, experience it. There's that hot water on you. There's the smell of the shampoo that you're using. There's the clothes fresh out of the dryer, pulling on that set of hot socks on a cold winter day. Actively engage with your brain, because DID comes from pain. Somewhere, somehow, there was pain that caused you to separate. In my case, the physical stuff of molestation and the alienation from my body. Most divided people don't want to feel their body. They disconnect from their body. They don't want to remember those body sensations, what it was like back then. And that causes a complete lack of development of the pleasure portion of your brain. And if we have a pleasure portion that's well developed, then we can retreat to that when the going is tough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Very specific illustration. There's a lady that came to me who had been to most of the big boy therapists. She had one particular part that everybody knew about, and nobody could engage with that part. Long story, I figured out that the part needed texture. The lady went down to the fabric store and she bought several pieces of lace. They were about 1 inch wide, heavily textured, and she sewed strips of those across a sofa pillow. She went to the counselor's office, put the pillow on her lap, and with her fingers stroking that heavy texture, there was enough pleasure that that part could stay present and engage with a therapist and not run away.
Right.
When you don't have a pleasure center in your brain, your only alternative is to run, to divide, for that part to leave and shove another part to the front. And I believe that before spending $1 on a therapist or on a book or a manual, to begin to develop your brain at home, alone, 5 senses, you anticipate, you stay in the moment when you're feeling it, you savor it afterwards, so that you can face the anxiety of the counseling situation. That's my 2 cents worth. Very unconventional, but it works for me.
It makes perfect sense to me. That's something I've been fascinated with for quite a few years. I started meditating, and I used to think meditation was evil until I realized Peter was in a trance meditating on the roof when he got the sheet with all the animals on it. I thought, well, maybe meditation is okay. So I started meditating and really working. Actually, it was through your stuff, of course. I started meditating and praying and really trying to work on building new neural pathways in my brain. Because I know that I did a lot of damage. I had a pretty intense history of drug abuse in my past. And I know that I did some damage, and I'm sure there's a lot of gray matter up there. So I've been working on that stuff for years, on rebuilding the pathways and hopefully going around roadblocks and putting stuff back in order.
You can have the best software in the world, but it needs some hardware to run on.
Right.
People spend massive amounts of money trying to fix their mind, their software, when their brain is still broken. So I'm saying, hey, do the free work at home before you start spending money on a therapist.
Right. Yeah, that stuff is, it's been like intensely beneficial for me with I used to sit in before I was reintegrated, it was like a constant noise in my head, loud. It was like static all the time. And so the only thing I could do is listen to, I still do it out of habit just because I like podcasts, but I picked up an MP3 Bible. Somebody bought me one, and I realized I could put that in, and the noise from that, and then the fact that I felt like I was, building myself up, it actually helped me to stay, so I could work throughout the day, and I didn't have as many episodes. And
on the surface, you were blocking.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But then I realized what I was doing was a Band-Aid, essentially.
A workaround.
Yeah.
And it beats not having a workaround, but eventually we got to get past the workarounds and heal the root.
Right. And so I started doing meditation. I meditated or prayed. I called it prayer at the time, but really it was more like meditation. And it was actually, when I first started doing it, it was really dark because there was so much, I couldn't sit down and not have what I would consider evil thoughts, running through the background or somewhere. But I decided, you know what? Oh, they're going to be there whether I'm, in my office praying or not. So I might as well try to work them out. And so I sat there for hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, and I would meditate, and pray and pray and pray and pray. And that it was through that, and I'm sure the power of Christ and stuff, but it was through that really seemed to shut that down finally. And it took a long time, a lot of focus, and that's what I was doing, was rebuilding those. I would have a bad thought, I would repent, rebuke, pray, like every time. And what I did is eventually it was like snapping a rubber band on your wrist over and over again for, when you do behavioral modification therapy. I did that in my brain, only I really feel like I actually was able to reroute a lot of the highways and, pathways in my brain. And now I feel much, much, much more put together. I'm still doing some work on it, like my jujitsu classes. I realized I've been really bad with rights and lefts my entire life. I was dyslexic when I was a kid, so severely. And in jujitsu, all of a sudden I know I don't have to think about which way is right, which way is left. What I did is I connected the right and left side of my brain through jujitsu, which is really an interesting. I never even thought that was going to be a possible benefit, but that's another example of ways that you can reroute, rewire, and fix your brain. Because in jiu-jitsu, you have to use your right side, left side. It's all about angles. And, how to break the other person as fast as possible, essentially.
So here's a question on reintegration or integration.
Integration.
Yeah, is that a permanent fix, or is that usually something that's like once you're DID, always DID? It's just a manageable. Can you be permanently fixed or permanently integrated?
Very good question. I would say 90% of the time that a part is integrated, it's permanent. There are a few large parts, particularly those that have been programmed, that if they are integrated prematurely, or if they are accidentally traumatized within a few weeks after the integration, they might separate out again. So there is that factor of sometimes having to integrate a part more than once, but it's not a major issue. Let me give you a different piece of language that's not widely used. It's my term, that is assimilation. So when I'm working with a divided person and trying to picture integration, I use a cup of black coffee with cream. So the black coffee is your core self. The cream is a part. And you pour the cream into the coffee, and it's there. It's in the coffee. You can't reach in and scoop it out like you could an ice cube, but the white is still distinct from the black. You take a spoon, you stir it up, and the two become one. You can't really separate out anymore. So the act of integration is a very short thing, but it's not deeply connected. And it's going to take somebody from a few hours to a few days to assimilate, to knit that broken bone back together, if you will, until they become one. And so, depending on how far you are along in the process, it's going to take more time or less time. Early on, you integrate one part, small part, that's going to be a big deal. They're going to need a week off to assimilate and to adjust to the new self. You get towards the end of the journey and you nonchalantly assimilate, or you integrate half a dozen parts in a single 1 hour session, and tomorrow they're good to go. So a lot of it is the math. If you're putting a 50-cent piece into a 60-cent original self, that's going to be a pretty big adjustment. If you're putting a 50-cent part into a $50 original self, it's just no big deal.
Yeah.
Where you are in the journey, how significant the part is, and how healthy your original self is to be able to assimilate quickly the part that came in.
I gotta say, you have great visuals that you build to explain what you're talking about. I don't know if you noticed that. Just like you're talking and you illustrate it with the coffee. It all is very clear when you explain it. And I think you're nailing those visuals.
Well, let me share the backstory for giving hope to other people. When you come to the realization that you're DID and you look at how much of your life has been affected by the DID, your education, your emotional self, your spiritual self, your community, everything is scarred and affected by it. It's very discouraging, very demoralizing. You say, I'm 40 years old and just now seeing how much of my life is broken, and I haven't even started to fix the brokenness. I mean, it's sickening. There's just this overwhelming sense of you can't be serious, that I'm starting to rebuild the wreckage at 40 years old. You can't be serious. Now, it helps tremendously to see God's omnipotence and his ability to redeem a trashy journey. And I'm passionate about God's ability to do that. I was born right brain dominant artist. I mean, I scribble all the time. I doodle in the pages. When I went to the beach, I drew pictures on the wet sand because it was a big enough canvas to entertain me. The first spanking I ever remember was for a glorious mural that I colored on the living room wall when my parents weren't watching. I was an artist. I was made to be an artist. Art was in me all the time. When I was 15 years old, there was an incident that we don't need to discuss, and a part came to the front that was so deeply traumatized by that incident that on that day, I laid down art altogether. And I was 50 years old before somebody was talking to me, and I looked back and realized, whoa, I was obsessed with art as an early teenager. What happened? I was able to recreate the trail. So my design was to be an artist. Because I was divided, I couldn't handle the bump in the road that I ran into. So I made an interval. I shut it down. And by 50 years old, unless you're Grandma Moses, you're a little bit late to start a career in art. But God caused me to take that thing that was in me from canvas and to carry it over to my writing. And I use word pictures all the time in my writing, such as the cup of coffee. I'm always using word pictures. You can define our culture. You listen to somebody else from our tribe, they're going to use those. Yeah, you know Arthur. I know that story, that picture. And it's God redeeming my art, packaging it in a different way. When I didn't know I was DID, I didn't know that I'd shut down my art. He just repackaged it in my writing and my speaking. And I'm a very word picture person because God is an amazing redeemer. So
right. That's very cool. That's very, very cool. Well, do you have any more questions?
I got one. This is like, I don't want this to sound like a silly question, but we were talking about the trauma as a kid and like with the turkey and not always being triggered when you get older. One of the thoughts that came in my head is the dentist, and nobody really likes the dentist. Is there any connection with you have a trauma at the dentist when you were a kid, and as you go back, like nobody wants to go to the dentist isn't at all. Is that any way possibly? So that was exactly what popped in my head, is just the trauma of going to the dentist. I don't know one person that loves it, but it just seems to be like a more traumatic experience than just I don't like going to the dentist. It seems to be like an actual trauma, but not necessarily a crazy trauma, but just a more stressful experience. I don't know. I was curious about that.
Well, we need to zoom out and put a bigger frame around that. Let me do a simple answer first. I haven't seen any studies related to DID from the dentist, but I think there's a deeper story. Let's back up and look at dentistry as a lifestyle. I saw a study once that said that dentists are the white collar profession that has the highest suicide rate and the highest divorce rate.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Say, whoa, every effect has a cause. What is it about dentistry that is causing this? And my theory is it's emotional isolation. Unless you're a sicko, it costs you to inflict pain on somebody else. My father was pretty much a man's man, but when I had allergies as a kid and I had to take a shot every week, Dad couldn't bring himself to stab me in the arm with a needle. He just couldn't. The thought of his inflicting pain on me, he couldn't do it. So I had to stab myself. And the amount of emotional repudiation that people bring to a dentist causes a dentist to shut down emotionally so he doesn't have to feel your rejection. You tracking with me? So by and large, not every individual, but a lot of dentists have learned to survive their trade by being emotionally shut down. Therefore, they go home, they don't reconnect with their wives, therefore they get a divorce. They don't connect with any of their friends because they're emotionally shut down. Therefore, they move into suicide eventually when they're insular. That's a theory. But if you put a human being in a context of trauma with emotional support or trauma without emotional support, and it makes a world of difference how they survive. Look at birthing. This is part of the argument for midwives or for doulas. You have another woman there who is emotionally supporting the mom, not just technically supporting the mom. There's a different feel than having a doctor who is not happy to be there and just, dealing technically. So I'm guessing that you're probably right. There are individuals who, not because of the trauma of dentistry, but because of the emotional isolation. Here's somebody hurting you who is so emotionally shut down, there's no connection, no ability to engage with him while you're going through a hard time. Just a theory, just a guess. I've not seen any studies.
That kind of made dentists more scarier to me, just right there. Like I have no emotion. Like I kind of, man, I already didn't like them as it was. Now it's just like I'm here to hurt you. Period. No reasoning.
We're Native American, my family, and my little brother. We've been seeing we go to a tribal health. I did most of my life. If I don't have health insurance for some reason, I go to the tribal health here in town. And I went 6 years ago, and I looked at the dentist. I said, "Wow, you're the same dentist from when I was a kid." And he said, "Yeah, I don't really remember you because my last name has been changed. We could go over that too, Arthur. But my name's been changed twice since I was born." This guy goes, he couldn't remember me. And I said, "Well, do you remember my younger brother?" And I said his name, and he throws his head back and laughs. He said, "Absolutely. How could I forget your younger brother? It would take 2 hours to do a shot or a drill. I mean, they'd have to literally strap him to the table. He bit him. I mean, he was terrible." It's funny you mentioned that, though. I was thinking, I don't know where it came from even. I'd forgotten about this. It just popped up earlier. One of the first traumatic experiences I remember as a kid, there was a lot of stuff similar to what Arthur went through in my past, but I had this really weird, as a young adult, I had a really weird thing, and I still don't eat red Jell-O. I don't know why. I do not like red Jell-O. There's something about it. I figured out years back that it was the only thing I could eat after I had hernia surgery at 3 years old. I had double hernia surgery. And I wonder if that was part of because I have another memory earlier than that.
Association, we call it an association.
Yeah, it's funny because that's very similar to the dentist question. I'm sure. I mean, and I still to this day don't like doctors. I really don't like. I have no desire to have any kind of surgery. I mean, it would have to be life or death for me to let them cut me open. So that's possible because I can't really trace back the exact date where that fracturing happened, but it was back there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your new book called, Arthur?
New book? We don't have a new book. The new album we just released are Strategies for DID Part 1.
It's called Strategies for DID Part 1?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not ready to get off yet, but I want to run over I want to give out some of your information in case anybody um, listening decides they need some assistance. So what is your website?
It is theslg.com, SLG Sapphire Leadership Group. So THESLG.com.
Okay, excellent. And anybody, I mean, to all of our listeners and you and your wife and stuff, I don't care. I know we have a lot of listeners. I think we're both Christian, but I'm kind of an esoteric Christian. I have a lot of friends that are pagan and all kinds of other stuff. And I don't care what background you come from. Arthur's books on blessing your spirit, especially the ones on blessing your spirit in the womb. What's the name of that one with the baby one?
Ministering to babies in the womb, and then we've got nurture in the womb.
Okay, so those, I mean, we went through those with our nieces. My sister-in-law and her husband did those while she was pregnant, and these little girls they're I think 8 and 5, and they're as intelligent as any 13-year-olds that I know. And I know that you can see the difference in them next to their classmates, and they go to Faith Christian, so they're at one of the top schools in town. That all the kids are really intelligent there.
Yeah.
But you can see a major difference between them and their contemporaries. And I know the blessing your spirit stuff is huge. So I highly recommend any of that stuff to anybody, and not even if you're having a problem or struggle, but it just really, those things really seem to help to build you up in general, and I highly recommend those.
Let me just make a passing comment for those that are from different streams. I'm not religious. I'm not part of any church, not part of any stream. I'm spiritual, and we look at the spirituality of the world around us, not just us, but the rest of creation, and seek to create a cohesive explanation for how things work and why they work. And again, we're data people. We look at the reality, look at the data. We've released a teaching last year called A Celebration of God that, for whatever reason, is hugely attractive to birds. And I had a lady in Canada that put a feeder out in the middle of winter. It's like 8 degrees below 0 centigrade. No birds came. She put her MP3 player with one earbud out the window, and within 20 minutes, she had birds at her feeder. So this huge number of stories of the animal kingdom responding to that teaching. But the one the other day that caught me off guard was a lady with an orchid. She put the orchid in her window. She positioned the flowers towards the light, because we all know that plants, particularly flowers, need the light. And within a week, the majority of the flowers had turned so that they were facing the MP3 player that was playing that. So this is a spiritual world. Plants have some spiritual sensitivity. Animals do. We do. And we are just barely scratching the surface of the majesty, the immensity, the complexity, the scariness of the spirit realm. But I'm not religious. I'm spiritual.
Right. That's the same with me too. I have a bad habit of labeling myself, and I refuse to not, claim Christ as my savior, which I know I don't.
Resilient.
Different tools that you'll be willing to talk. You don't have to.
No. And it is for what we have done, and cultures define it differently. I'm doing a teaching soon on the essence of womanhood, and I'll begin with Fiddler on the Roof and Tevye singing If I Were a Rich Man. And one of the many things that he would like if he was a rich man was that his wife would be really fat and she would have a proper double chin. It's hard to think of Angelina Jolie going to the best plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills and ordering up a proper double chin so she could feel good about herself. It's a different culture. Honor in that Russian culture was being fat, having a proper double chin. Honor in this culture is being skinny and not having a proper double chin. So honor varies immensely, and it does not heal shame. Dignity is what heals shame, and dignity comes from who you are, not from what you've done. and the knowing and the understanding of facets of our design are a really big deal. And the more we understand about who we are and how we were made before society messed us up and trauma messed us up, that is the place of dignity. When I realized I'm an artist, I haven't drawn anything for 40 years, 35 years because of that trauma, but I am an artist. Art is in me. It's expressed in other ways. That was a dignity point. You didn't give me art. You can't take art away from me. You follow?
Right.
What I am, it's in me. The ability to look at data and to kind of look around the corner and see things other people don't see. This is part of the treasure of DID. When you have been divided for a long period of time, survival is a sticky wicket. And somehow DID people learn to look around the corner. They can see things others don't see. They can intuit in ways others don't. And when we're integrated, we don't lose that. There is an uncanny component, an intuition, call it whatever you will. I call it being able to see around the corner, that is intrinsic in us, that we didn't get from anybody else. It came out of our trauma and out of our survival technique and methodology. Those things are dignity issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Dignity is who I am, that came from the hand of God. Nobody gave it to me, and nobody can take it away from me. You may take away my ability to express it. You put me in prison, I'm not going to be doing podcasts from there. You can control the external environment, but even in prison, I'm still an artist, even if I'm not drawing. Nobody can take away from me who I am. We good?
Right.
Yeah.
That's our framework. The more we can move towards dignity and understanding our essence, the more we can distance ourselves from that toxic shame that is a brutal part of DID. We have an album in the store called From Shame to Dignity. But let me bring this blessing to the table for anyone who wishes to reach out and receive it. I'm speaking to your God-given human spirit. You, the spirit, were designed by God. You were crafted uniquely. And no human being got to speak into your design. No demon got to speak into your design. You are the product of the mind of God. You're the product of the intentionality of God. You're the product of the creativity of Almighty God. You're not an accident. You're not incidental. You're not an add-on. You are, in your essence, the product of God's creativity. And Spirit, I realize you may have been banged around a lot. I realize you may not be in front. The soul may have crowded you out. You may not have a voice in this individual. But regardless of your playing field, in your essence, you are still the product of the creativity of God, the intentionality of God, the will of God to make you the way He made you. So I bless you, Spirit, with having that confidence, with having that dignity, with being able to look at yourself and say, nobody has ever had a spirit like mine. I am unique in all the annals of human history. I am a deposit of the nature of God, designed with creativity, with purpose, with intentionality. I bless you, Spirit, with anchoring this individual in dignity and knowing that nobody can take away the gifts that God has placed in you, the human spirit. I bless you with dignity from knowing who you are in the eyes of the Creator God.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Arthur. That's fantastic.
You're welcome.
Really cool to get you to do that in person. I've listened to your CDs for years.
Not the same as a book, is it?
No, that was very, very neat. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Like I said, I've got like 20,000 things I'd like to ask you I'm hoping that you'd be willing to come back on in the future and talk about a lot of other stuff. I'm really excited to get into some of the other topics with you. Is there anything else that you have, any questions for us you have, or anything else you want to say before we get off of here?
No, I think I'm good. It's been
Excellent.
an rambling discussion. I do rambling much better than I do linear, so thanks for not being too structured.
Oh yeah,
That
no
was
problem at
perfect.
all.
That works for us too, I think.
Yeah, and anytime you're in town or you're bored, or if you're not traveling all over the world and have a minute, shoot me an email and we'll make a spot for you. Like I said, I've got a lot of other topics for you, and some of our buddies also want to talk to you as well. So I'll shoot you an email.
You know where to find me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you too. Nice meeting both of you. We'll catch up with you another time.
All right, cool. We'll talk to you later.
Mhm. I'll
You can
log
click
out.
on- Yeah. Cool. Well,
That's pretty good.
that was awesome.
I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't know much about Arthur, and I didn't know, I wasn't quite sure what to expect.
I'm telling you, and this is like it's been really hard not to be a fanboy, when I'm talking to him and stuff, because he's been such a huge part of our life and like mental health for the last 8 years that, I remember the first time my wife put on one of his CDs. It was a really weird experience for me.